Sarmiento, and this is my multimedia discussion post for week 2 of MPA540. So quickly going over the overview, I will start off by introducing the hiring manager that I interviewed for this assignment, and then breaking down the 4 screening phases and how that hiring manager takes part in each of those, and then I'll close off with closing remarks. So for the hiring manager, I chose to interview Elizabeth Sarmiento, and she works as the nursing department assistant manager for the perioperative services in Kaiser in the LA branch. And I chose her because she has 24 years of experience. She is my mother, and within Kaiser, she's held a variety of different roles, both on the floor as a staff nurse in the emergency room and operating room, and then within her administrative management roles, she also has 7 years under her belt. So I thought that her experience would allow her to, to know what it looks like to be an ideal team player, and that it would contribute to her knowledge overall as a hiring manager. So diving into phase 1 of the screening phases, this phase is where they're identifying between unqualified and qualified applicants. So at Kaiser, they have a talent and acquisition department with staff that provide their recruitment services. So it's a staff member or a person that directly handles all of the pre-screening, and they make sure that applicants meet the basic, threshold requirements, like having a bachelor's in nursing. They do accept associates, but it's preferred that they have a bachelor's. They have at least minimum of 2 years of experience in the main operating room, and they agree to certain special conditions when it comes to working for their department, which is needing to be on call, having certain certifications, and they also preferred experience with spine, neuro, and ortho cases. And they do not use a computer or any programming that automatically does this pre-screening of applicants. Now moving on into phase 2 of the screening phase. Once recruitment services weed through all of the candidates in the pre-screening, they create a bid list of the remaining applicants that were narrowed down from the overall pool. And this list can range from 4 to 10 candidates. And so the recruiter services sends this bid list to the hiring managers like Elizabeth, who I'll call Liz moving forward. And from there, Liz would go through the bid list and call each of them individually herself. And she basically gauges for confidence, eagerness, and also confirms that they meet the minimum requirements. And then from there, she's the one who determines the candidates that they choose to interview. So from that list of 4 to 10 people, it's typically narrowed down to either 2 or 1 candidates, which was interesting because I know in our text it discussed typically narrowing it down to a minimum of 3. So those 1 or 2 candidates will be selected to do the interview, which is typically a structured panel interview, and typically it's done in person, but if needed, they also offer it to be virtual. In addition, they also do assemble testing. Since they are typically staff nurses that they're looking for, they do want to make sure that they're, able to set up a room and meet other requirements. So they do have to come in person to do those tests. And during the panel interview, all 10 of the considerations that were discussed in our text are done. So they have a plan beforehand. They typically have an odd number of panelists, so a minimum of 3, just in case there's a tie with the scoring. They want to make sure they have a tiebreaker, but sometimes they do have up to 5 panelists, and they do go over basic facts. They introduce the candidate to, the job that they're applying for. They hold the interview in a private setting, typically in their conference room, and they go through a specific list of questions that are asked of all candidates, and all of the considerations is what they go through. So she said yes to all 10. Moving on to phase 3 is where they determine the best candidate of those interviewed, and whoever is on the panel is who determines the final candidate. So each of them have, their score sheet with all of their notes, and they use that to determine the final candidate. And if there are any doubts, then they call the references and check in with them and then see if that could help. But if not, and it does happen, then there isn't a second round of interviews that happens. They typically just decline all, and then they go back to talent and acquisition to get more bidders and a new bid list to start the process over again. Once a final candidate is selected, then the hiring manager, so Liz, would input which candidate is selected, and then the talent and acquisitions team reaches out to that candidate and goes through the negotiations. Now moving into phase 4, if the candidate agrees to the negotiations and to take the job, then we go into the post-offer and onboarding process. This is where HR and educational training comes into play, and they ensure that the candidate has all their documents that they need, that they go through a proper background check, and receive their orientation as well. In terms of hiring issue, Liz did mention that there are always issues behind the onboarding and how long it can take, and that they do have a new employee checklist that helps with that. So with that breaks down all the phases of the screening process, and for the most part, Kaiser does follow the screening hiring process that's described in the text. With that, I will close off here with my information, and thank you all for listening.